right, we are back with a new college 12 pack. It's been a little bit of a hiatus for us, holidays, traveling, but we're back to recap the college football playoffs. But I have to say, Tyler, I hope you're doing better than Matt House is doing today after announced that he would no longer be staying. He would not be returning, along with several other key uh, defensive staff at LSU. But I digress. We're not here to talk about LSU. We're going to talk a little bit about the Rose Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, and the College Football Playoff National Championship that's going to be going down Monday night, January 8th. I'm excited about that. I'm not excited that it's a Monday game, Tyler, because Tuesday you're gonna be up late, and then Tuesday you got to drag into work. It's unfortunate for even us who work in the industry. I mean, we're still dragging into work Tuesday morning. But let's talk about the Rose Bowl. And Tyler, just right off the bat, what was your biggest takeaway from the Rose Bowl? Obviously, it was a tight, contested game, but I feel like we walked away from that game seeing that Michigan was as advertised. They proved that they are one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah, just real quick, that national championship on Monday night is always rough on the East Coast, so that's always not very fun for me. But yeah, looking at the Rose Bowl, like I think I kind of have two simultaneous takeaways, which was first of all, like Michigan up front defensively, like on another level of anyone else in the country, honestly. Like, I mean, that was a performance. I mean, Georgia didn't do that to that Alabama team. An Alabama team that maybe has some issues on the offensive line, but still some really talented players there. Like it shouldn't have been as dominant as it was, but they got absolutely beat in the trenches. Milroe sacked 6 times, and that kind of leads into my other main takeaway, which is that this Alabama passing offense just isn't quite where it needs to be, right? Like, I mean, with Jalen Milroe, I think he's taken steps throughout the year. That's pretty easy to see. But like when push comes to shove, it's not quite there. I mean, I think he threw for like less than 120 yards in this game. They ran the ball okay, which is, pretty good on that front. But, it's really tough. And I think, if you told me that was how the game was going to go going in, I would say, man, like, Alabama really needs a great defensive performance. And they weren't bad, but I do think that, I was a little bit wrong, I think, about what JJ McCarthy would be capable of doing. I still think he missed some throws in this game and was a little bit inaccurate on some throws, not a perfect game by any stretch of the imagination, but he, made some big plays when it mattered. He led the offense and moved the ball on a really talented Alabama defense. So all of that to say, man, like I'm really impressed with Michigan. I was a little 50-50, but I picked Alabama going into this game. And now, I mean, we'll get into it, but Michigan, I don't know if anyone can beat them.
That may not be, but I think the one thing that we'll get into is what Washington is going to be able to do, challenging that team vertically. There just was no vertical challenge. They could play with everything in front of them when they were playing against Alabama. Milroe was a threat to run the football, of course, and we've seen that. But he was really no threat throwing the ball. I mean, he was pretty efficient. Talking about 16 out of 23, but he only threw for that 116 yards. No touchdowns, like you said, sacked 6 times. He did rush for 63 yards in that game. But really, outside of Jace McClellan running the football, I just felt like this offense really wasn't going to challenge Michigan. They were up late, needed some defensive stands, couldn't get them. And then ultimately the run game and going into the overtime, Blake Corum being able to do what he's done all year, and that's bounce off of would-be tacklers, get into the end zone, secure that victory. I question a lot of the play calling, especially late there in the second half. And, I felt like they were a little bit handcuffed offensively. Alabama was, especially late in that game when they had an opportunity to put the game away. And then once again, at least tie or attempt to take the lead in overtime and really just – I walked away from that game mightily impressed with Michigan and a little bit disappointed in Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really sloppy game for Alabama. Like they didn't look they didn't look that impressive to me, honestly. Like, as much as the way Florida State played against Georgia, even down other guys, sort of vindicated that decision in a way. And I mean, Alabama had a chance to win that game too. So it's not like they were completely outclassed, but like, I mean, how many of those snaps went awry? Like I lost count. I couldn't even keep track of it. And those, proved to be pretty costly plays. They spent a lot of time going backwards on early downs, and that just hurts. against a defense that just is not going to give you that much, So I think that's the primary takeaway is, just didn't play clean enough in a game that, in spite of all their flaws, they had ample opportunities to win, and it was far from a perfect game for Michigan. They had their own sloppiness and mistakes and all that, but ultimately they were the more consistent team and they won, the battle up front. And, football is about blocking and tackling. And, in that game, Michigan clearly had the advantage there.
They certainly did, but now they got their hands full. They're going to have to face Washington team, who is coming off a victory in the Sugar Bowl against Texas. And we got what we thought we might see, a high-scoring affair with two of the best. I would argue that these two teams had the two best wide receiver cores in all of college football. When you talk about Adonai Mitchell, you talk about Jordan Whittington, Xavier Worthy on the Texas side, and not to forget Jatavion Sanders, their all-star tight end. But then you look over on the other side with Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk. You have McMillan. They had a plethora of weapons as well. Not too surprising to see, and really came down to the final minute of that game before we really knew who was going to walk away with that. At times we thought that Washington was going to run away with this football game. They had the lead late and were able to hold on. But, that game for me, it was never a question of, Texas not being in it even up to late. They had their opportunities and just squandered it. And my biggest takeaway was Steve Sarkisian. What was up with those play calls at the end? Because I felt like three passes into the end zone on uncatchable passes. If that was your best opportunity to win the football game, I really don't know what he was trying to do there.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because, I think that, in a game where your offense had really been struggling for a lot of the game, they were not, I don't think it was a great game for Quinn Ewers. I really don't. I think he had, missed some throws, but he was really great down the stretch there. And I just don't really understand what they were trying to do, after all they did to come back in that game. And still, a better pass on that last ball that sailed over his head. Like, that's probably a game-winning touchdown if that's just thrown a little bit lower, a little bit lower into the back. So, they had every opportunity to win this game, but the fact of the matter is the margin for error was non-existent because of how just unreal Michael Penix was in this game. Those for 430 yards, 2 touchdowns. Like, I don't, there's no need to relitigate the Heisman. Like, my opinion on Jaden Daniels winning it hasn't changed. But with that being said, if you're holding that vote today, Michael Penix probably wins it after that game. Because he made – not only, was it the production, but just high level throws, and they needed every single one of them in that game. It was just an all-time performance from him. And those receivers, Rome Odunze had 125 yards in that game. And the defense, like I said, they did enough. They gave up some big plays, they gave up some points, but a defense that we had questions about, they held up their end of the bargain. They did enough to win that game. So, pretty impressive for Washington. And I'd say, the only major concern I have for this team is they might be a little bit one-dimensional against a very good Michigan front because, at the end of the game there, obviously the running back Dylan Johnson goes down, suffers what looks like it could be a pretty serious injury. And if he's not able to go, they don't really have another guy that's seen significant carries this year. So that's just going to put even more pressure on Michael Penix against just a really nasty defensive front.
Yeah, and even that injury late in that game gave Texas that opportunity late to drive the length of the field to try and tie that game up or win it in regulation because they were down 6 at that point. So a field goal would have touchdown, an extra point would have won it for them. But I felt like in recent years we've seen a lot of blowouts in these semifinals. So it's kind of nice to see these closer games, these highly contested games. And it also just brings more excitement moving forward when you look at what's to come in terms of the 12-team playoff that will start next year. Not quite sure what the full model is going to be for next year. It was 6 plus 6, the 6 automatic bids, and then the at-large bids. We might be going with 5 and 7, so that'll be an interesting one to see how that all plays out. But when we look at the college football playoff national championship game down in Houston, we're going to have Michigan and Washington, essentially 2 teams that will be facing each other next year in the Big Ten. playing for that Big Ten title, or at least attempting to get to the Big Ten championship game with the new look 18-team Big Ten. But this is going to be a great matchup with two different styles. You have the high flying offense run by Kalen DeBoer, and then you obviously have, when you look over at on the other side with Michigan, they're more of a grinded out type of team. Two different schools of thought. So we will find out if defense ultimately will win this championship. I know you talked about it a little bit earlier. You think that Michigan is clearly the team with the advantage in this matchup coming up.
Yeah, I mean, as we've both kind of alluded to, I think this is the ultimate test for this Washington offense that's been really, really good. Like, you know, they're going to get pressure on Michael Penix in this game. I mean, Washington's had some offensive line injuries this year. Like, I mean, they're going to, I mean, to me, there's no debating that. I think that they're going to put pressure on Michael Penix. And if Dylan Johnson can't play in this game and you can't run the ball, it's going to be tough. I mean, he's going to have as good a game, if not better, than what he did against Texas. And I think one thing that is interesting to me, though, is I think you do have to also assume that Washington will score some points in this game, just with the weapons they have. And I do think, I do wonder still a little bit if Michigan can keep up. That Rose Bowl never really turned into a shootout or anything like that. They kind of controlled that game state, even when it wasn't looking great at times late in the game. It was never sort of out of the way Michigan wanted it to be playing out. If they find themselves down in this game, say what you will about the Washington defense, but, you just said that Texas receiver room might be the best in the entire country. They held them fairly in check. I mean, they got their production, but it wasn't, an outright dominating performance. I don't think Michigan really has anything that's up to that caliber. So, I think there's reason to believe that Washington, if they can, not just get beat at the line of scrimmage and, let Michigan run all over them with Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. If they can prevent that from happening, I think there's reason to believe that this game could favor Washington. If they can score points, I don't know if Michigan can keep up, but I don't know how realistic that is.
Yeah, when you look at it, especially the game that we just saw, Washington was 3 of 11 on third down. So I think that's really where this game is really going to factor in, is who's able to get those first downs for Washington, or are they able to keep them relatively in check? Because I think when you look at this game, that's kind of the matchups that I'm looking at, obviously in the red zone. But if you're consistently putting Washington in third and long, because they really don't know what they're going to have run game wise with Dylan Johnson being hurt, you're going to have to capitalize on those opportunities. If you're a Michigan defense, force them into third and long and really put the pressure on Penix, who wasn't sacked, but he still dealt with pressure against Texas.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. It's going to be tough. Like we just saw how disruptive that Michigan defensive front can be. And I don't think we've really ever seen Michael Penix under that kind of stress. Even in the Oregon games, it wasn't like that. So I think that is a major question for sure. Like, I think I could 100% see this game playing out in a way where, like, it's just a wake-up call completely for Washington's offense, and they just get absolutely blown up at the line of scrimmage, especially if the run game's not going anywhere. So that's kind of my fear. Like, I think this is going to be a good game. I think it's going to be a competitive matchup. But if you're trying to sell me on a way where it's just not at all, kind of in the way that last year's game was, to me, that's it. Is just, Washington's offense runs into the same problem that Jalen Milroe in Alabama did, which just can't go anywhere, can't hit the explosive plays. What do you do then?
Yeah, they're going to have to figure that out. They're going to have to find a way to push the ball down the field, I think. I mean, we've seen J.J. McCarthy do a good job of, being efficient, throwing the football and coming off the run game with Donovan Edwards, with Blake Corum. But what happens when they get into a shootout? What happens when the offense on the other side is able to put up a lot of points? That's really where I think this game will be won and lost. It's going to be Washington on offense against that Michigan defense, because if Washington can score a lot, that's a lot of pressure on a Michigan team that hasn't really shown really since they got into the teeth of their schedule, especially late in the year and into the playoff. And are they a team that can put up a ton of points? And that's really my biggest question for them. But that's all going to go down Monday night. But before we move on to our next topic, Tyler, I just want to know, go ahead. What is your prediction and who is your MVP for the national championship?
I mean, I'm gonna stick with Michigan for prediction. Like, I mean, I don't love it. I haven't felt great about my picks in any of these games. And by the way, I was wrong about both semifinals. I picked Alabama and Texas. So that goes to show, how valuable my opinion is here. But I think I'm leaning towards Michigan just because I think if there was any doubt in my mind, I think Dylan Johnson's injury really kind of solidifies for me. Like, this is gonna have to be a like career kind of game from Michael Penix, I feel like. So I'm going to go with Michigan, and I'll go Blake Corum as MVP. No, I'm going to go JJ McCarthy because I think he's probably going to produce decently well in this game.
Okay. I agree with you on a lot of what you said. And I also was wrong. But one of us is going to be wrong because I'm picking Washington. I'm going to go with Washington. I just think that they're going to be able to do enough offensively to put that pressure. And for my MVP, I'm not going to go with the quarterback. That's the easy pick, I think. Now, I agree with your reasoning for JJ, but I'm going to go with Romo Dunze. I really think that he's going to have a big game. Maybe it's similar to the game we saw last year between Ohio State and Georgia, where Marvin Harrison Jr. just showed why he was the best wide receiver on the planet. But I'm going to go wide receiver, Romo Dunze, and Washington gets the victory for the first time. I'm saying 30 years. It's been, I think, 33 years since they've been in a national championship. So I'm going to go with the Huskies. All right, but let's talk about something about the teams that didn't win, and we're going to start with Alabama. Tyler, if you're looking at an Alabama roster right now, if you're looking at the Alabama team, obviously they have a lot to hang their hat on. They won the SEC championship by beating Georgia, ending that long win streak. They have a lot of top players coming back next year. They have a lot of top recruits coming in. But when you look at Alabama right now, like where do you go heading into next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly questions, right? Like, I mean, first of all, let's just say, like, I mean, this year has ended up being much more successful than I think anyone thought back in September it was going to be. I mean, back when it was 3-0 at halftime against South Florida, I don't think anyone thought this was a playoff and SEC championship caliber team. But it was. So, credit to Nick Saban, obviously, you can never doubt that guy, no matter how things look. But, I do think there are questions, despite the way the Georgia game played out, this was a flawed team that was flawed throughout. They played, tight games, close game against Arkansas, as we all talked about, should have lost to Auburn. I mean, needed a miracle to win that game. And we're not even having this conversation now. So, I think it's pretty clear that this team was limited. And honestly, I'm kind of concerned about the offense. I think if you would ask me before these semifinals, Jalen Milroe might have been my Heisman pick going into 2024. And, he still could be. He still could, make that kind of leap. But I think it's pretty clear he has a ways to go. And I look at, I still think Alabama hasn't really maintained its separate. I think it's still pretty clear, despite beating Georgia, that still looks like the team that's more well-positioned going into 2024, especially with, Carson Beck coming back. So I still think there's questions about where this team fits into the new SEC. No more SEC West, Texas and Oklahoma coming over. There's a lot of questions. And I think, like I've said, most of them rest on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and when you look next year, just look at the schedule early on. I mean, they're going to play at Wisconsin September 14th or September 28th. They're going to play Georgia. Of course, the LSU game in November. They're going to play a Missouri team who's looked fantastic, just coming off a victory over Ohio State in the Cotton Bowl. And then they close out their road regular season at Oklahoma, and then obviously the Iron Bowl to close out the year. They've got a tough schedule, as we won't hide that. But I think you're right. I think when you look at this team, they have some questions, and I have a lot of questions at the quarterback position. Jalen Milroe, clearly the guy that they should go with. Obviously, I think he's proven that. But there are areas that he needs to improve on, and more importantly, that's throwing the football. He has shown at times the ability to get the ball downfield and really take advantage going to that next level. But at this point in time, I would say he needs to be more consistent in that area, just throwing the football. And that's where I'm kind of hesitant on him, but I am high on him going into next year let's not forget he finished sixth in the Heisman race this year. I don't know if I would put him as a favorite, but five of the last seven Heisman winners were transfers, so I might back off him just a little bit and go with one of these transfers like Dylan Gabriel that's going to Oregon. But let's talk about the other team. You brought him up, Texas in the new look SEC. Quinn Ewers likely to come back. I haven't heard definitively, but from the people that I talked to around Austin, they're pretty confident Quinn Ewers will be back. Obviously, they might not have O'Donnell Mitchell. They're probably not going to have Xavier Worthy, who are likely going to the NFL, along with JT Sanders. So it'll be a new plethora of weapons. And obviously, they won't have Jonathan Brooks back at the start of the season because he tore his ACL so late in the year. But I think you have to like what you see of Texas, but at the same time, there are some concerns. They are losing their defense coordinator, who is leaving to take the head coaching job at Nevada. So there's going to be some changes in Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the outlook with Texas is a little bit different because I still think with the way it ended, it's pretty hard to argue this team didn't overachieve in 2023, right? I mean, like based on our preseason expectations. I mean, they were my pick to win the Big 12. I thought they would be that caliber team. I didn't think they were a playoff caliber team this year. I didn't think that's quite where this program was at yet under Steve Sarkisian. And even though they came up short, I mean, like I said earlier, slightly better pass on that final play. Maybe you're playing Michigan for a national title. So I think it's still an overall very positive outlook, even though you are going to lose some guys. I think, like you said, I think it's safe to operate under the assumption that Quinn Ewers is coming back. He hasn't announced that, but pretty deep quarterback class. I think, honestly, a guy that really could stand to benefit from coming back, I think could be in for a huge year. Maybe get kind of a Heisman caliber bump, in this offense coming back for another year. In an SEC where, it's early. I'm not going to declare this right now, but they could be my pick to win the conference next year. I mean, honestly, in their first year there, obviously Georgia and Alabama are going to be good as always, but I don't think there's necessarily that clear degree of separation between Texas and those teams. So I think the outlook is overall positive. You can't, like I said, I don't think anyone in Texas really thought realistically that, this was going to be a playoff team this year. So they're ahead of schedule, obviously stuff to address, and things are going to get a little bit tougher next year. But it's hard to be disappointed, even though the ending itself was kind of disappointing.
As an unbiased observer, I'm actually excited about next year. When you look at Texas and their schedule, they're going to play Michigan in week 2. So we're going to find out real quick how good they are. Obviously, the Texas-Oklahoma game, but they're also going to play Georgia. They're going to play Florida. And, of course, my favorite game, the Lone Star rivalry returns. Texas A&M to close out the regular season. That's going to be a lot of fun. But, Texas fans, there's a lot to be excited about next year, and specifically if Quinn Ewers returns. Although I know a lot of people are hoping that he doesn't, so we can go ahead and jump into the Arch Manning era. But he might be a backup for a second straight year should he not transfer between now and then. Never know. It seems like he wants to stay in Texas, but as we know, it's been pretty volatile when it comes to the transfer portal, which really just brings me to my next topic. Let's talk about the current college football landscape. And Tyler, do you agree that we need a college football commissioner?
Yeah, I think that's pretty obvious at this point. We need someone. The overarching organization of this sport is an absolute disaster. When you compare it to, I think every other sport does it better, obviously at a professional level. But to me, the one that really jumps to mind is the NFL, just how, and we'll get into this, just the calendar of everything. They've got it all, down to a science much better than this sport does. And that's mostly because there's not any overarching leadership over it. There's Charlie Baker, but that, he's not really overseeing, this, the minutia of the sport, and he doesn't even have a say in the college football playoffs. So there's only so much that can be done there. And ultimately there's just not, that leadership in place.
So simple. Yes, there needs to be a college football commissioner. Secondly, they need to separate from the NCAA when it comes to college football, because as you just alluded to, Charlie Baker has no say in the college football playoff, and it's the FBS athletic directors, commissioners, school presidents who really run college football. But I do think that they need to have a commissioner, a one central voice to kind of fix some of the issues when it comes. Now we're going to be excited next year because of the 12-team playoff. So a lot of those New Year's Six bowl games that lost their luster the last couple of years due to opt-outs, due to preparing for the NFL draft. A lot of those players are going to be staying because they're going to be competing for a national championship. Of course, the first round is going to be on campus playoff quarterfinals. The semifinals will take the place of the 4 out of the 6 New Year's Six bowl games. And then the other 2 will be the remaining semifinals before the national championship. So I think that helps alleviate some of those issues. As far as some of the other bowl games, I don't know. But one thing that I've kind of discussed, and I hate to say it because I've always been you can't have too many bowl games. But Tyler, I think there's too many bowl games. And the reason why I bring that up, when almost 30% of your postseason field is talking about the teams that are playing in these postseason bowl games, 6-6, I think we got to raise the standard. You can't just win 6 games and get a bowl game. I think we need to change that up a little bit.
I think I tend to agree that there's too many bowl games. Probably, I don't know if I agree that the issue is the 6 wins like standard though, because I mean I think there was a time that I can remember pretty recently when bowl season was much more compelling with the same standards. I mean, I think ultimately it's a motivation problem. So I mean, you got to find some way, I think, to if you're going to keep, you either have to reduce the number of bowl games, so making a bowl is something that has some degree of exclusivity. There's some element of desirability to making a bowl game, because right now there really isn't, especially with, a lot of these, there's not exactly destination bowl games. You might go do something kind of touristy and kitschy, like whatever, but that's not, it's not like something that's super appealing to 18 to 23-year-olds for the most part, especially with the calendar being what it is. I mean, there's every incentive in the world for these guys to opt out, especially if they're in the transfer portal, and they have to be because as we're recording this, the transfer portal's closed. It's January 3rd and the transfer portal's already closed. So, you don't really have an option with the way that this all works out. And to me, I mean, I just want to go on, just kind of go on a tangent, but like this calendar is an absolute mess. You have portaling going on at the same time as closing out high school recruiting classes with early signing day, while also doing coaching carousel and replacing assistants and preparing for bowl games and playoffs. It's a mess. You can't do this. The 12-team playoff will fix some of these issues with bowl, the lack of interest in these bowl games. First of all, there's just going to be more, the games on campus sites, the first round of the playoff, that's just, 6 or 4 more bowl games that people care about. But at the end of the day, it's going to raise some bigger issues, because now you're going to be preparing for bowl games, doing bowl practices like right in the lead up to early signing day and in the heat of the transfer portal. This is a disaster. They have to find some way to fix this calendar.
One thing that I think we should get rid of is the early signing period. Go back to February. When you look at some of the pro sports, the draft always comes after free agency. So perhaps, have your transfer windows, that's when you're adding in your players, and then go sign your recruiting class, aka the draft. That's the way I think that they should do it. That's one aspect that can alleviate some of those issues where you're not having to worry about signing, 18 to 20 players in December. You're focused on, the transfer portal. You're focused on your coaching carousel stuff. But I also think it'll fix some of that coaching carousel stuff because coaches won't be leaving, especially if they have a chance to win a national championship. That's going to alleviate some of those issues, some of the coaching changes. I think it really boils down to focusing on transfer portal if you want to do it there. Because the big issue that they have, Tyler, is these kids are trying to get on campus in January at their new school. So I think you almost have to have that transfer portal in window in December, early January. I guess it's the end of November, start of December, and then obviously focusing on those bowl games.
Yeah, I mean, these kids don't really have an option here. I mean, to me, the example that comes to mind is Malik Murphy, who was the backup at Texas. He even said he didn't want to enter the transfer portal, when he did, but he didn't really have a choice because, Texas could be playing, or, in his mind at the time, could have been playing football until this coming Monday. And by that point, it's too late. So, he wasn't able to be a part of, with the team, for what could have been a national title run. So I think you have to kind of keep that in perspective whenever you are talking about, players opting out of bowl games. There's always kind of more layers to it than just what's on the surface. But I think you raise a really interesting point about the early signing period. I mean, I think we've been in it for, it's what we're approaching like 10 years of the early signing period. I think it was like 2015 or something like that. And I think it's been pretty negligible. I'm not going to say it's been a bad thing. I don't also think it's necessarily been like a particularly great thing, in terms of player agency and roster planning. I think it's nice, I'm sure, to get guys locked up early, but I think, like you said, you kind of have to get guys on campus by this point for the portal. So if one of those were to get pushed back, I think that you're right. The early signing day would be the casualty there. But yeah, I mean, it's just, we have to find a way to sort of normalize this and do what the NFL does where things happen at different times, because this is just, it's a mess right now.
Yeah, and I think it was 2017, perhaps, when that started. But still, the point being that, yeah, they need to get rid of that early so they can open things up. But once again, this is why there should be a separation from the NCAA, why they should go with the commissioner. I don't know who that would be. A lot of people seem to think the SEC commissioner should probably throw his name in the hat. And while I do like Sankey, I don't know if he's in the best interest of FBS and more so the best interest of the SEC. But I digress. They do need to find somebody who can actually who has knowledge of how this all works and how could put this all together. But that's going to do it for this edition of the College 12 Pack. We'll be back next week, recap the national championship game, and I think it might be time to start talking some college basketball here, Tyler. We're ramping up our conference play, and then obviously the march towards March Madness. We all get excited for that. All right, that'll do it for Tyler. I'm Patrick. See you next week.